In January of 2007, Senator Hillary Clinton declared her intention to seek the White House, and in doing so, entered the race as a frontrunner for the Democratic Party nomination. A December 2006 national poll by the Gallup organization reported that respondents named Senator Clinton most often as their choice for the Democratic nomination. Senator Barack Obama, who had entered the race 4 days before Clinton, was named second. Despite the fact that Clinton was leading in the polls, 33% to 20%, in the month in which both candidates announced their intention to run for president, the top 6 circulating newspapers in the United States ran 59 stories that mentioned Obama in the headline and just 36 that mentioned Clinton. That the press seemed biased against a woman running for president was not surprising. In fact, historical trends show that women candidates for president consistently receive less press coverage than equivalent men running in the same races. What was surprising was that such a disparity was present when the woman was the frontrunner, and that such a pattern, which had been manifest in press coverage since 1884, was still true in 2007. Today I'm going to talk about my book, Women for President, Media Bias in 8 Campaigns, that contains the results of a study I did of how women candidates for president between 1872 and 2004 have been covered in the press, especially as compared to equivalent men who ran in the same races. And though Senator Hillary Clinton did not become a candidate until after the book was complete, I've done a pilot study on coverage of her race, and I'll tell you what I know. Now, when I embarked on this study, I expected to find dramatically disparate coverage of women in the 19th century and some nicely converging lines showing equality in 2004. The surprising conclusion of the book is that there were no trend lines. Most of the differences found in the coverage of 1872 were still present in 2004. And this is all the more striking when you consider that in 1872, when the first woman ran, women did not have the federal franchise. No women were elected representatives. Women, with very few exceptions, were not reporters or editors or newspaper owners. And yet, for most of the variables I examined, the trend lines remained flat. The fact that there have been relatively few changes in press coverage suggests that attitudes about men and women have not changed as much as we think they have. Now, before I begin detailing the findings of this study, I want to warn you that they can be demoralizing. And so, it's important to remember that when women run, women win just as often as men do. In fact, it's a myth. If you ask most women, they think it's harder for women to get elected than it is for men. But in fact, long-term studies have consistently shown that when women run, women win. Now, I'm still going to argue that we need to be concerned about the press coverage. And one reason we need to be concerned is that the nation is built on the proposition that people should have equal access to power. But the real problem is that very few women run. And what I'm really worried about is that the way the press covers women who run may dissuade other women from running. So on a positive note, I want to say that probably the most important thing we can all do to kind of charge against this press coverage is to run for office. And I really want to encourage you to do that. Let me talk very briefly about how I conducted the study. I actually did not look at all women who have run for president. There really have been quite a few. But I looked at 8 women who I thought would have received the most press coverage. Then I used primary totals or vote totals to find the most equivalent man running in the same race. And then I took the highest circulating newspaper in each of the candidates' hometown and the New York Times from the first day of the first month in which they entered the race through the day they exited the race. Now, as I mentioned, Senator Hillary Clinton had not run yet, but I did conduct a pilot study, and I looked at the top 6 circulating newspapers for January of 2007, which was the month both she and Obama declared their intention to run. Okay, well, who were these women? The first woman was Victoria Woodhull. She ran in 1872. She had the nomination of the Equal Rights Party. She owned her own newspaper and was the first woman stockbroker on Wall Street. She actually got got very few votes, so her most equivalent male candidate was James Black of the Prohibition Party. I couldn't even find a picture of him. The next woman widely known to have run was Melba Lockwood. She ran in 1884. She also had the nomination of the Equal Rights Party, which was a different party actually, but by the same name. She was an attorney and partner in her own law firm and the first woman to practice law before the Supreme Court. The most similar vote totals in that race was Benjamin Butler, who ran with the nomination of the Greenback Party. More widely known was 1964 when U.S. Senator Margaret Chase Smith ran for office. She was the first woman who ran having held federal office. She had served 9 years in the House and 15 years in the Senate. And she actually placed third in the primary for the Republican primary. The most equivalent primary vote getter in that election was Governor Nelson Rockefeller. The next woman was U.S. Representative Shirley Chisholm. She ran in 1972. She had served two terms in the New York State Legislature and 2 terms in the U.S. House of Representatives. And the most equivalent vote getter in that election was Senator Henry Jackson. The next woman to run was Lenora Branch Filani. She ran in 1988. She had the nomination of the New Alliance Party. She was the first woman to get on the ballot in all 50 states and the District of Columbia. And she was the second third-party candidate ever to receive federal primary matching funds. She was most similar in vote totals to then Libertarian Ron Paul. Also in 1988, U.S. Representative Pat Schroeder ran. She was a Harvard-educated attorney. She had served in Congress for 8 terms. She was senior member of the House Armed Services Committee. And she didn't actually enter any primaries, but she was most similar in polling totals to U.S. Representative Richard Gephardt. In 2000, Elizabeth Dole ran. She was also a Harvard-educated attorney. She had served as Secretary of Transportation, Secretary of Labor. She had been president of the American Red Cross. She also qualified for federal primary matching funds, and she was most similar in polling totals to Republican primary seeker Steve Forbes. In 2004, U.S. Senator Carol Moulton ran. She had served 6 years as Assistant U.S. Attorney, 10 years in the Illinois House of Representatives, 1 term as Senator, and had been Ambassador to New Zealand. She was most similar in polling totals to Senator Bob Brown. Now, after I collected all of the articles, I read them and coded them and aggregated and averaged the results over 8 races. And here's what I found. Oh, no. So, overall, when comparing equivalent men and women candidates, men got twice as many articles written about them, and the articles were 7% longer. And again, I was not comparing winning men to losing women. I was comparing men and women who polled about the same. What's even more demoralizing about this is the trend over time. As you can see, it's not improving over time. In fact, the only race in which the woman got more coverage than the equivalent man was in 1872. And as I mentioned in my introduction, the Clinton and Obama data were fully consistent with this. 59 stories headlined with Obama and just 36 with Clinton. Not only do women get less coverage, but the coverage is less substantive. I looked at issue coverage, what I call issue coverage. It's really the public policy positions of the candidates. On average, 16% of the paragraphs about the articles about women covered their policy positions, whereas only 27% of the paragraphs about men do so. Overall, that means men get 68% more issue coverage than the women. Now, there's this kind of a good news, bad news situation with Clinton. She clearly did better than most women who preceded her, but she was not treated like a typical white man. She still didn't do quite as well. And again, the trend over time here is not promising. You know, that's not like huge gap in the 1800s and small gap in the aughts. That's just, you know, one line stays on top and the other line stays on the bottom.